r/AskReddit. Has a teacher ever made you cry in class? How/why? My first grade teacher mocked me for not knowing how to tie my shoelace. I liked Velcro, but she complained it made too much noise. She wanted me tested for a learning disability. I tie my shoes like a pro, Ms. Redacted. And I never make my students feel the way you made me feel. This reminds me of when I was in middle school and had to wear laced dress shoes for school. The laces on mine were just really weird, so they never stayed laced for long. Ergo I stopped trying to lace them and would just stuff the laces in the shoe. One time as we were stood in line, my teacher noticed my shoes weren't tied and asked why, so I explained how they never stay tied. Then she went "Do you know how to tie your shoes?" To which I was like, yes of course, they just don't stay tied, which she still didn't believe as she asked me if I wanted her to show me how to tie my shoes. Thus I had to kneel down in front of the 30 other kids in my class and demonstrate that as a 12-year-old I could in fact tie a shoelace, which did in fact come undone by the time we walked to our next classroom. Edit. She was actually being really nice about it as she genuinely thought I was too embarrassed to admit I couldn't tie my shoes. It was just really bizarre to me at the time. My professor for materials science in college was notorious for being extremely hard on people that used cell phones and left early. One day a kid gets a call, answers it, gets really silent, and then starts to leave. Our professor was livid, demanding that he come to the front of the class to apologize, and when the kid protests he practically started screaming. The kid is in tears at this point, walking to the front and apologized to the silent classroom. Yeah, it turns out his grandma died and that's what the phone call was about. Happened to a girl I knew in high school too. She had her phone on because her grandma wasn't doing well, and they knew it was only a matter of time. She picked up in the middle of a lecture and got up and started to leave. The teacher was a bitch anyway, and one time yelled at us for putting lotion on during class, but she said as the girl was about to walk out, "Are you going to take the hall pass or not?" very sarcastically, and the girl just stood there stammering for a minute and finally said no and just left. We were all silent and the teacher started lecturing us on asking to leave and making sure we get the pass when her friend piped up her grandma just died. The teacher was silent and just continued the class. Next class the girl was there, the teacher publicly apologized for calling her out. My first grade teacher got a note from the office saying she was needed home. She was one of the first people who had a cell phone that I knew, so she got it out during class and called home. An EMT answered. Her husband had killed himself and her little boy had seen it. She started sobbing, therefore most of our class started crying because we knew something really bad happened. She ran out and our principal came in about a minute later and finished the day out for Mrs. S. She didn't come back for a few weeks. Our substitute teacher had all of us make cards for Mrs. S, and I remember I tried to draw a rose and tell her how sorry I was. Edit. Yes, I spelled principal wrong. I get it. Yes, it happened to me in my senior year of high school during English. I've struggled with depression for a better part of my life, and my senior year it got extremely bad. I skipped school at least once a week, usually more. My grades all went to shit. Despite always being relatively well off academically, I was going through a lot of different things, but didn't really feel like I was worthy of help. My English teacher that year was also my English teacher my sophomore year, so we were already on good terms. He noticed my poor attendance, bad grades, I'm sure the lack of effort in my appearance as well. Some days when I missed school he'd call me and ask where I was. He left a few voicemails. He was clearly disappointed in me and worried. The day he made me cry was actually senior skip day. I wasn't having an awful day, so I actually went to school. It was going to be an easy day, so I might as well not have the absence on my record. When I got to English, I was the only student there. Absolutely none of my classmates showed up. At first my English teacher started laughing, understandably. Class started, and I was studying for our final exam coming up. I would fail the class if I didn't do well, and it was an app course. He came up to me and started talking to me. He said he noticed I haven't been myself lately and was concerned, and he knew I was a better student than that. We kept talking about my depression, a recent split from a 3-year relationship, my home life, my struggle with drug abuse. He told me I was worth something, that he believed in me. At one point he said he wishes he could adopted me and done more to help. I couldn't stop crying. I was so overwhelmed. Nobody had ever said things like this to me before. I'd never heard anyone tell me they were proud of me. When I went to walk across the stage at graduation, he was in the front row. He looked at me and gave me a thumbs up and said something to the effect of, "You got this, I'm proud of you." And I think about that every day. He had more faith in me than anyone ever has, and it's something I'll never forget. Edit. I really didn't think this would get that popular, so thank you guys for that. I guess I should have added this earlier, but I didn't want things to get too convoluted. But this teacher is also the only reason I graduated. I failed that final exam I was talking about earlier. When I got my paper hard copy back, it was a failing grade, but in the grade book he gave me a B, just high enough for me to pass the class and graduate high school. I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful every day for him. I was in my 6th grade math class, and the teacher had it out for me for whatever reason. I was a really good kid, and I was quiet and pretty good at math, but I didn't like it. I did, however, love to draw. So one day, my math teacher finishes the lesson and tells us all to work on homework. For context, in my language arts class we had been given an assignment to illustrate a chapter of the book we were reading. I was sitting quietly and working on my drawing for my other class, and the teacher comes up behind me and asks me why I'm not working on homework. I tell her about the assignment from my other class, and she starts yelling at me in front of my whole class that she meant math homework, and how could a drawing possibly be homework anyways? Then she tore my drawing in half and I cried. I went to the bathroom to continue crying. For context, I didn't have a ton of friends in the 6th grade, but all the other kids thought that what the teacher did was so horrible that the other girls followed me into the bathroom to comfort me, which was really nice. Then my dad went to a parent/teacher conference with her and told her that every kid has that teacher and that she would forever be mine. And what do you know, he was right. I was in 1st grade. My PE coach really did not like me. She was always putting me in timeout for breaking the rules. Rules I didn't even know were rules, like sliding or swinging on your belly, or picking up rocks off of the playground. One day we were playing a game of telephone in the cafeteria on a rainy day. The girl who whispered in my ear, well, I couldn't understand her. It just sounded like wet spitting in my ear. I asked her to repeat herself and she did. Wet spitting. At that point I was scrambling to make something up to pass along, and the coach was loudly pressing me to hurry up and think of something. I guess I thought about it too long, because she snapped at me that I'd ruined the game, and then she put my nose in the corner for the rest of PE time while everyone else played. I just sat there quietly crying, and I wasn't even allowed to look out the window at the rain because she'd tell me to turn my head back to the wall. I had a professor at law school on the verge of retirement. There was one class at the law school that was an introductory one that kind of stood in for orientation. It was pass/fail, and it allowed the doe-eyed 1Ls to get the hang of reading case books without having to worry about real grades. It was nice. My professor had written the textbook for this class and was largely responsible for the school assimilating this program. Everyone loved having this class, by the way. It was an awesome way to ease into the scariness of law school. The thing is, he was this scary, booming, large old man. Very intimidating. At the time, he seemed to epitomize the type of professor you'd see in the paper chase. If he didn't hear you, he'd shout use your diaphragm. There were moments he'd interrupt a student in the middle of talking and say no, you're not understanding the question. I'm going to move on. We were generally really scared of him, and most people were kind of resentful that he put so much pressure on us for a class that was intended to be chill. On the last day of this class, though, he talked about how he was going to retire. Then he spoke about how this class was his baby, he cares about it so much, He's been so impressed with our performance, etc. At the very end, he choked up and said, if only the school would let me, I would continue teaching this class until I die. After speaking, he walked down the aisle of the lecture hall out the doors. There was a moment of silence, and the entire class of 100 people burst into applause. And fuck, I started sobbing. IDK, there's just something about a stately old intimidating man being that affectionate and vulnerable that just makes me feel this visceral sense of compassion. Damn. At the end of Thanksgiving break in 2nd grade, I was playing football on the front lawn with my brothers and a couple of friends. My oldest brother laid me out so hard it knocked out a tooth. The next day we were back in school and I could not stay awake, no matter how hard I tried, and kept falling asleep, in addition to dropping things left and right, and just generally being out of it. In 2nd grade, we did these quizzes called Math Minutes, or something like that had like 20 to 30 quick, basic arithmetic questions on them. I almost always finished first in the class. On that day, I had been getting on the teacher's nerves all day due to above mentioned issues, and then he passed out the quiz and said once everyone finishes, we can go to lunch then recess. I remember looking at it, not being able to comprehend it, then realizing that he was yelling at me. Apparently about 5 or so minutes had gone by and everyone else had finished the quiz and was staring at me getting yelled at, and I was sitting there with a blank quiz utterly confused as to everything that was happening. He yelled for a bit more, then got the teacher's aide to take me to the nurse's office. She called my dad down, he was the guidance counselor, and told him something was off with me. An hour later I was in the ER waiting on a CAT scan. Turns out I had, as should be obvious by now, that I had a moderate to severe concussion. Spent the rest of the week at home. I'm a teacher. Have made plenty of kids cry. It's not as hard as you think, even with 7th and 8th graders. Weirdest one was last year. We were working on a drawing assignment and I walked by and this really quiet kid was just kicking the shit out of this assignment. Hell of an artist for a 13-year-old. So I stopped and told him that was amazing work. Started bawling so hard he had to leave the room. Apparently he's deathly afraid of male teachers. So much so that a former teacher had contacted CPS and investigated the family for abuse, but it turns out the kid is just not all there in the head. My first year I had a few students who were a little too huggy. As a dude, it was super uncomfortable, so I decided to put a stop to it. Girl came in for a hug, and I put a hand up and was like, can we switch to high fives or something instead? I'm not a big fan of all this hugging. Started bawling. Literally refused to speak to me for almost 2 whole weeks. Middle school is weird, man. In freshman year of high school, I had a math teacher who was really great. I struggled with math, and she would let me sit in her class during my free periods to study, gave me additional tutoring, and was always so nice to me. She was really young and her classes were pretty rowdy because she didn't have the courage to dole out punishments, but I was super shy and didn't contribute to that vibe very much, if at all. During parent-teacher conferences, she completely flipped shit on me and told my mother that I was the worst student with an awful attitude and was ruining her classes with my disruptions, etc. etc. My mother believes this at first and rips into me upon exiting the classroom, and I burst into tears in front of everyone and their parents. She starts to calm down when she sees how genuinely horrified and hysterical I am, and considering that I'd never been seen to do anything like this before, I ended up calling classmates over who were also very confused and vouched for me too. The next day my mother had an unpleasant meeting with the principal and the teacher and transferred me out of her class. I saw her later that day walking back to her classroom in tears and she never spoke to me again. I think she moved to a different school the next year. I still have no idea what triggered her complete personality change. It was so bizarre. In the height of the Survivor craze, my grade 6 teacher decided it'd be fun if students could vote each other out of certain class activities. She couldn't grasp why having 12-year-olds scheming together to decide who didn't get to participate in class activities was a horrible idea. I was an overweight, high-functioning autistic kid with no friends and dealt with so much bullying on a daily basis that I attempted suicide once already. Age 12. I pleaded with her not to go through with it, but she'd already made up her mind. Sure enough, by a near unanimous decision, I was the first kid voted out. Each time she read my name out, the class laughed louder and louder. All I could do was hide my face and sob. To this day, if I hear strangers laughing, I assume it's at me. You might think maybe she had some big noble lesson planned, but no. She was just a middle-aged housewife who was addicted to TV and wanted to bring some drama to her useless life. In 8th grade, I hurt my neck in gym. Long story short, aerodynamics decided the back of my head was a better impact point for a soccer ball than the goal I was facing. Thanks, random teammate. Anyways, I had math later that week, and we got new seating assignments. Why? Well, mostly because a few troublemakers were seated next to each other originally. Now, this wouldn't usually be an issue, but the new seat I got, put in basically faced straight away from the blackboard. Seats were now in clusters of 4, so I had to turn all the way around to learn anything. This, of course, was murder on my recently injured neck. Being the nerd I was, I soon approached the teacher, asking if he could swap my seat. That's when things went downhill. He asked me why, and I told him that it was killing my neck, and I had hurt it in gym. For some reason, this set my teacher off. He proceeded to mock me in front of the entire class for a good 5 minutes, laughing about how poor little Jiggerbreaker 88 thinks he deserves a better seat because he was dumb enough to hurt himself in gym. Now, I was also a psychologically challenged middle schooler, dealing with extreme social anxiety, so that was a double whammy. Within 45 seconds, I was sobbing at being mocked by a teacher in front of the entire class. Now, there's no fancy Reddit end to this story. I was in the advanced math class, so there was no other teacher to swap to. The teacher didn't get fired, or even, as far as I can tell, disciplined. On the bright side, my classmates realized how much of a dick the teacher was after that, and they made an honest effort to console me, a level of empathy rarely seen in middle school. The rest of the year was uneventful, aside from me being afraid to ask the teacher for help with anything. Ended up with my lowest grade in a math class until college. My 4th grade teacher drove me to the edge of suicide. I've mentioned this story before, more or less, elsewhere. Here, I still to this day don't understand why she hated me so. I had the best grades in her class and was always the good girl. She'd single me out for bullying and told the other kids it was okay to bully me as well. I got screamed at on a daily basis for being weak. She loved to humiliate me when I did make any mistake on my work, or tell me I wouldn't get anywhere, or that I expected to have things just done for me. This is the same teacher I saw twice slap other students in the face. The pinnacle came one day when I finally begged her for help in ending the constant harassment and bullying from the other students. She stood me up in front of the class and told me I was worthless, would never amount to anything, and how dare I ask her for help? She pretty much said the same thing to my parents when they complained. I wasn't worth anything, so why should she bother? This was a short squat little bitch with scoliosis, who often broke down in class and cried over her hard childhood. She went off on poor me benders. 5th grade started in much the same manner. Any hopes I had in making friends was quickly dashed. I couldn't feel any emotions anymore, and a couple of months into the year, we moved to Idaho from Utah, where I'd lived for a little over a year by that point. If it wasn't for Mrs. Furness and her sharp eyesight, as well as a very caring heart, I probably wouldn't be here. I only know it now after looking back, but she went out of her way to make me feel special. All her students loved her, and, as I now know, she had one of those people come in who deal with emotionally troubled students. I didn't understand why. Back then, I had this person come to see me a couple of times a week to spend time with me, talk, and do fun things on the playground and such. We moved again just before the school year was over, and Mrs. Furness actually cried and gave me a folder full of stuff to do on the way across the country and let me pick out a book. to read on the trip as well. It's the book I still have, and the one that introduced me to Laura Ingalls Wilder. I credit this woman for saving my life. Sadly, when I did manage to locate her again, it was from her obituary as she died in 2014. I really wish I could have reconnected with her. As for my 4th grade teacher in Utah, I hope she's rotting in hell. During my senior year in college, I had proposed to my girlfriend of 4 years. She said yes. Looking back, I wasn't there on a maturity level. Nothing serious like cheating or anything, but I was kind of self-absorbed in my own world. Anyways, fiancé called off the wedding. I went into the teacher's office hours the next day, barely able to function, and broke down on how I couldn't go to class that day and spilled the whole story. This was an electives class, Intro to African American Studies. The teacher looked me in the eye and only said, "Do you have a place to stay?" with the calmest, most serious voice ever. I cried some more. Fortunately, I grew up about 40 minutes away from the university, so I did have somewhere to stay. As a white male who was a jerk at the time, this professor opened my eyes a whole hell of a lot. Don't worry, this story does have a happy ending. Got my shit together, got back with the girl, and this past spring celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary and have 2 wonderful sons together. It's a long story, but it's something that really affects me even now, almost 40 years later. My 4th grade teacher would often give us problems to solve and then ask for the first 3 kids who solved them to show her their solutions. If they got the right solution, they'd get stickers, or a spend 5 minutes in class doing whatever you want pass, or an A on homework without even needing to do the homework that day, etc. Really depended on the difficulty of the problem. So she did this one day, and I was one of the 3 kids who brought her our solutions. She looked through them and nodded sadly. I can't believe that out of these 3, done by kids who typically know what they are doing, only one is correct. Why don't you take them back and try to do better? And this time you can discuss them with your neighbors. I took mine, and I remember having discussions with other kids, and everyone else seemed to have a different solution than mine. I was sure mine was wrong, but I didn't know where I had gone wrong. After another 5 minutes, the teacher took a poll of the whole class, who got what answer. There were 3 different solutions, with one of them being most popular. The teacher sighed again, and actually started writing on the board names of all the kids in each group. Meanwhile, she was muttering about how she couldn't believe that we couldn't solve something so simple. At the end, she added her own name to the list of people with the most popular solution, and said that she'd be willing to let the rest of us, who weren't in that group, off this time without a bad grade, if we could spend the next 10 minutes figuring out where we had gone wrong. At this point, the group I was in was the smallest one. I think there were just 4 of us. I was absolutely certain my answer was wrong. Heck, the teacher just indicated as much, but I couldn't figure out what it was that I did wrong. So for the next 10 minutes I tried to understand the other solution, and couldn't figure out why it was right and mine was wrong. After those 10 minutes, the teacher did another roll call, and most of the kids had switched their answers to be the same as of the largest group. It was just me and another kid who was still stuck with our solution. The teacher TSK'd again and said she'll have to write us up and give us detention or something else. I don't remember what punishment she promised, but it sounded terrifying to me at the time. Unless, of course, we could right then finally get it through our heads why her answer was correct. I tried, and I couldn't. By then, I was feeling so ashamed and crying so hard, and I wanted with all my heart to be able to change my answer, but I just couldn't see how the other one was correct. The teacher finally just told me to give her my notebook so that she'd write a note to my parents about what I've done in class. I don't know how I even managed to get my notebook to her, but when I handed it to her, she took it, and here's what she said. Shoot, I'm starting to cry now as I'm writing this. That was some potent lesson I'm going to give you to as today. The first one, the lesser one, is for actually solving this math problem correctly. And the second, a far bigger one, is for sticking with your solution despite the pressure. Just because a lot of people think something different from you doesn't mean it's right and you are wrong. And even the fact that some authority figure, like a teacher, is a part of that group is not a reason to change your mind, unless it's your own logic and heart that compels you to do so, not just peer pressure. After this speech, I promptly ran out of the class and ran to the bathroom, where I cried until I could get myself together. But that lesson certainly stuck with me and had come in useful many times throughout my life. I owe many thanks from the bottom of my heart to my teacher for that lesson and for making me cry in class that day. 8th grade art class. I will never forget the humiliation of this day. I was in art, doing art stuff, something with charcoal. I think it was a perspective house that I was doing. Anyways, I had my own technique that I like to do. I didn't like doing the art teacher's way because I didn't want my hands to get completely covered in charcoal. I knew it was inevitable, but the way I did it helped. My grandma, who is an artist, taught it to me when I was a kid. Anyways, she's walking by and sees that I have a tissue under my hand as I'm shading, and she took it out from under me. Just took it, didn't say anything. So I grabbed another tissue, sat back down, and went back to work. The teacher then proceeded to yell at me that I wasn't doing it the right way. I told her that my grandma taught it to me and that she is an artist and that I liked it better this way. She didn't like that. She proceeded to scream at me in front of the entire class. I started to bawl. I was terrified. I ran out of class and into the bathroom and sat in there for the rest of art and half of my biology class. She later went to the high school while I was there and was involved in the drama department, which I did as well. I stayed far away from her and did everything in my power to not speak to her. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.